then we'll keep going. All right. So if you're here with us today, you probably are familiar with Hexagon, but in case this is your first event, just letting you know you're in the right place. Hexagon is a community of women and non-binary folks, and our goal is to really create a community for those of us growing our careers in UX, not only through events and skills building, but really through building those community connections, more than just networking. I've made some really great friends through Hexagon, and I'm so glad that it's been available. So our theme for this series is equity. And in our kickoff event last week, we asked you what equity means to you. And I pulled a couple of examples here that I really loved and felt like represented the breadth of what equity could mean. So yes, we want to make sure that groups have been historically suppressed are given extra consideration. Everyone has access to the same resources. We challenge social norms by pursuing equity, and every person is given dignity and respect, not based on what they produce, but just based on the fact that they are human. And Antara gave me a really great reminder this week, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, that it's not just human equity, it's also equity for the world, which includes, all living things. So this can really be as broad or as narrow of a topic as you want it to be. So quick recap of the series. Hopefully you were able to join us last week for the kickoff event. We're here in our user research workshop. We'll have an office hour coming up on the 24th. And this is an opportunity for you to get feedback from designers in the field with your team. Then join us July 15th, a Thursday night as well. We'll take our research and synthesis, I guess, that you are able to do after this workshop and start turning that into the solutions we want to build. We'll help you with another office hour and jumping into a prototyping workshop, office hour, then learning usability testing methods to be able to validate your solutions with users, another office hour, and then the big shebang, we will be doing a showcase event to get to see everyone's amazing work. And I want to introduce our amazing presenter today. April Showers has been in the UX field for more than 20 years. So she has a lot of experience on all of us and will be sharing some of that wealth of knowledge with us today. She currently is a design thinking director at Schlumberger. So if she can use this material with oil and gas engineers, I'm really excited about what she'll be able to help us do as UX designers. So one note, we have a lot of content today. There's going to be a lot of methods shared that you can utilize in your project. Don't feel like you have to utilize everything that you learned today. This is going to be an overview and then allow you some time to practice. And then you'll have a couple of weeks to put this into real practice with your teams outside of the workshop. So sit back, get your coffee, get ready to learn, and we'll have time for Q&A as well. One other housekeeping note, we've worked in a bio break into the agenda as well. So we'll pause before we jump into breakout rooms later. So just let us know in the chat if you have any questions and we'll get going. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to April to get us into our content.
All right, let's see. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, if it might be afternoon in your area.
On time.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen and kind of jump around the board a bit. Let's see. So the things I want to kind of the first part of the day, I want to kind of quickly just kind of cover going over just kind of a research overview, talk kind of high level about some of the methods. We'll get into detail around just a couple. To Meredith's point, I'm going to give a bit of a, cover a lot, but then I'll also kind of focus in on just a few things that I think would be what I recommend that you actually kind of focus on as you practice over the next couple of weeks. We'll talk, briefly about preparing your research, a little bit about the mechanics of conducting your research. We will do a activity in the middle of our session, but basically when we come back from break, we'll spend about 20-ish minutes starting to work on our research plan. And then after we start to work out our research plan, and it's certainly just a starting point, right? You'll continue to work through your research plan after our session today, but just wanted to give you guys an opportunity to get started on it, so we can start to give you some ideas around best methods, or maybe some ideas around where we might be able to identify the right participants for what we want to learn. And then after we kind of do a little bit of just kind of starting to work on our research plan, we'll then kind of move on to the synthesizing part and how to generate our insights, so we know what to do once we have gathered all of our information. So as part of just kind of like the overview part, is what at a very, very high level, these are kind of the steps that we go through in our research process. And again, we'll get into these in a bit more detail. But initially you're going to come up with kind of what is your research plan. So you have your an idea of here's the challenge space we're going to dig into. Here are the things we want to be able to learn. Once we kind of know what are the things we want to be able to learn, you develop a research kind of protocol and script that that supports that research plan. You then want to figure out how are you going to recruit and schedule. You would actually do the actual research itself. Now you've got all this amazing data. What do you do with it? So you then kind of synthesize your information. Once you have kind of recognized patterns through your synthesis, you then kind of generate your insights and your design directives. And then if it's just your team, you probably kind of can stop there, but in general, right, we're generally going to have some type of share out or way that we're going to communicate. Here's what we've discovered, here's why we've made the decisions that we've made. So we'll talk a little bit about how you can do that as well. Before we actually get into some of the research specifics around some of the specific methods, just want to talk to this kind of a general about just some of the different kind of buckets, if you will, because it's so hard to kind of even figure out what method you want to apply in the first place. So imagine you've got hundreds of research methods that you can consider, and generally the different buckets they're going to fall into, and knowing kind of what buckets the research falls into, or even just kind of thinking about these buckets will help you to identify what's the most appropriate research. So at the highest level, so one of kind of your big buckets is you've got is the research method I'm selecting, is it qualitative or is it quantitative? And whenever we are typically talking about qualitative methods look to answer the why. So why is something happening? And then sometimes the what too, but qualitative is really focusing on the why. It's like why do I care? What's really important here. And then on the quantitative side, where we're generally looking at numbers to be able to quantify, how much or how many, right? So how often is this happening, so we can decide if it's really a problem we want to to investigate further, if you will. And then also you can kind of look at research methods kind of falling into two big buckets of, is this behavioral or attitudinal? And with behavioral, it's going to be more around what people actually do. So it'd be more of like ways of how can we actually observe them. I mean, be it kind of observing in person, or using kind of tools to aid in the observation. And then the attitudinal is more around, what do they say? So a lot of times you're kind of thinking about, is it really, do I want to understand what they do, or do I want to understand more around, say, just their attitude around a particular subject? Then also down here too, sometimes it's also kind of important to consider kind of the context of use. So here we might not have an actual product per se that we are doing research on, but in the future, if you were doing research and there's an actual product involved, when we think of kind of the context of use, it'd be more of a, are we performing our research where there is a natural context of use, and in which we're really seeing someone, using the product, as they really would? Is it a bit more kind of scripted, so it's not truly their natural context of use? Are we not even observing them using the product at all? So we've got to kind of, is it qualitative or quantitative, behavioral or attitudinal, and then kind of that context of use. And then also to make things even more confusing, we've got a couple of other buckets too that we can kind of look at. I'm gonna jump up here real quick. When we kind of look at some of the continuums, so you can certainly plot things on the scale of, qualitative or quantitative, behavioral or attitudinal. Another way that we can look at things is it something, are we looking at just kind of making improvements to something? Or are we looking at, looking at innovation as one kind of scale? And then also too, kind of on the evaluative versus exploratory. I'd say exploratory or generative would be kind of the two terms that you'd hear there a lot. So you've got a lot of different ways that you can kind of even start to look at your buckets of research, if you will. Very quickly, kind of back over to that qualitative versus quantitative, to just a couple of the other things that kind of start to differentiate some of those. So again, qualitative is about the what and why. Quantitative is about the how much, how many. The other things here too is that, when we deal with qualitative research, we are generally talking about, only a small handful of participants. So generally, if you have, whatever the kind of the targeted kind of user roles are, 5 to 6 people is really all you need for your qualitative. Again, you're looking for patterns when you do research. So if after 5 to 6 people, if you haven't seen, if you don't have any patterns established, then you'd want to increase that number. But in general, 5 to 6 people per user group that you're interested in learning more about should be a good place to start with qualitative. And I'm emphasizing that right now because I am going to be kind of pushing and recommending you guys to be considering mostly qualitative research right now, because of the types of things that we are exploring. Just a couple other kind of big differences between them too is, with qualitative, a lot of it's relying on kind of your impressions and understanding of what you are kind of encountering and observing. With quantitative, you're going to be looking for statistically meaningful results. You're going to have a lot of participants involved. And then with qualitative, our approaches can be a lot more flexible, whereas in quantitative, it's going to have to be very controlled. Otherwise, if it's not controlled, you're not going to be statistically significant. And then also too, a couple of other ways to kind of think about your research. I mean, again, kind of a minute ago, kind of talked about the evaluative and exploratory, but I kind of even kind of break that exploratory down into two kind of separate buckets of ethnographic and participatory. So just real quickly on the evaluative. Now, because we are starting in big open spaces of exploring. I mean, of course, evaluative is not something we would do right now. However, in just kind of giving you guys just kind of a broad overview of research to start, I do want to mention that if you are kind of coming back and doing research again for an actual product, in the company you work for, chances are you might actually have an existing product that you are going to be building from. So because you have an existing product that you are building from, just know that you might actually use some evaluative techniques upfront to get started. And when you're using those evaluative techniques upfront to get started on your project, you'll be doing that to, to one, just to kind of understand kind of what's working and what's not working, but even more so, you'd be using evaluative techniques at the beginning of your project to help with benchmarking. That way you can kind of see, okay, that's a measure kind of where we're at now. And as we come up with our new concepts and the new ideas and, and even implement, our new ideas, you'll have a benchmark that you can continue to measure against and make sure that you are for sure, making improvements. But I mean, I'm not going to spend time in our session today talking about evaluative. This is the only mention I wanted to have was just that, right now, I definitely don't imagine in anything that we are going to be focusing in on that evaluative is going to be appropriate at this stage of where we are in the process. But I did want to mention sometimes you do actually, there are, different contexts when that might actually be appropriate. Now, what I am imagining though, is that we're going to really, really want to most likely focus in on the ethnographic and the participatory. And on the ethnographic, that's where you're really, really going to be able to study, study kind of human behavior, if you will, ideally in as natural of a setting as possible. Um, and, 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 um, and then also on the participatory, a lot of times when we do actually have a participant, kind of in addition to kind of doing observations or interviews, sometimes it's nice to be able to do a bit of an activity with them. And so that's where the participatory research comes into play, where there's, some opportunity to do activities. And I'm gonna kind of go a little bit more in detail on the ethnographic and participatory for us. So when we talk about ethnographic research, and again, there's a bunch of different ones, but just kind of want to highlight these four for you guys as kind of a starting point, and then even each one of these have their own variations, right? So the main ones that you would typically encounter. So you've got interviewing, and then so interviewing would be a way of us to be able to gather information through direct dialogue with our participants. And then of course, when we're saying interviewing can be in person. Always better for it to be in person if it can. That way you've got body language that you can pick up on, and then even better than just in person, even actually in context. So you've got even more in the environment that you can kind of you can cue off of, and your actual participant can use as well. Another one that you would use a lot is kind of what we call kind of fly on the wall observation. So in fly on the wall observation, you don't really have the opportunity to be directly interacting with your participant. You might later on have the opportunity to directly interact with them. So for instance, you might be combining interview and fly on the wall together, where you've got a bit of time where you're just watching them, and then you have a bit of an interview part later, where you're like, hey, I saw you do such and such. Can you tell me more about what you were doing there? But the even better research method, if you can, is what we call contextual inquiry. And contextual inquiry is just a big fancy word for being able to do interview and observation together. So it's really, really nice about contextual inquiry is you're there in context, watching your participant in their natural environment, doing the actual activities that you're interested in learning more about. And you're able to ask questions along the way. They're able to kind of interact with you as they're going through it. A lot of times you can have them kind of, you can have it kind of take on more of like an apprentice mindset, if you will, and have them just kind of show you what they're doing and explain, kind of explain. But the main thing there, right, is it's in context, in their natural environment, and you're observing, and you're being able to ask questions. So And then the final one I want to bring up, just in case it makes sense for what you guys are doing, is what we call walk a mile immersion. So sometimes if you're able to actually be able to experience what, so, here, we're wanting to make sure that we truly understand the challenges of the humans that we're trying to, whose situations we're trying to improve. So how better to do that than to actually put yourself, in the situation and be able to experience that situation. So I just wanted to bring that up, and in case that is an actual opportunity of what you may be experiencing. And in this image here, kind of below the walk a mile immersion, this person is actually trying to experience what someone that is elderly might be experiencing. So they actually have this special glove on that starts to kind of simulate kind of restrictive movement and arthritis. And they've got these special glasses on that would start to, kind of simulate kind of just limited eyesight. So they're truly trying to see, just by simply opening a water bottle, how can someone, how can someone be struggling with that? But again, right now I'm thinking, or at least recommending, that we try to see if we can have the opportunity to do interviewing, and even better, is there opportunity for you guys to maybe do some contextual inquiry around the subjects that you're going to focus in on. Um, from a participatory research standpoint, and again, this is more of the interviewing and contextual inquiry is really all you need to do, and in my opinion, at this point. However, if you have the opportunity to do a little bit more, and especially too, because we're wanting to kind of flex and learn, there might, maybe you've got some opportunity to do a bit of participatory research as well. And with participatory research, basically, it would be some type of activity based that your participants would be doing as well. And that activity, it's the activity itself is not what's important here. It is the conversation that is facilitated through the activity that's important to you. So just a couple of quick options on participatory research. One is what we call kind of what's on your radar. And in what's on your radar is a way for them to, to plot things based on what is personally significant to them. So you'd have several categories that you would want them to kind of rank and then plot by personal significance. Another one might be, say, a diary study. So maybe you decide, I do want to do an interview or some contextual inquiry. However, I realize that what I really want to observe and learn from this person doesn't just happen in the span of, an hour or two. It's really something that takes place, say, over several days or several weeks. When that's the case, you might, combine that interviewing and contextual inquiry with a diary study, and have them kind of continue to capture their thoughts and their activities over a period of time. And it might be just as simple as them answering a few questions. You might have them kind of taking some pictures or some quick little videos and then sending it to you as well to kind of continue to document. So that's always an option. Now, given that we only have roughly a month to get this all done, diary studies is probably not something you'll be able to do, because that means you'd need to develop your protocol and plan pretty much immediately, and already know who you're going to target for your participants. But I did want to bring that up, since that is a powerful one for you to be able to consider in the future. Another thing you might consider right now is what we call kind of cognitive mapping. So if anyone is familiar, say, with journey maps, this is one of those things where you could have someone, hey, I'd like you to kind of map out your, walk me, visually walk me through your process of doing, of doing X, Y, Z. And so they would kind of visually, they'd draw a few things out and visually kind of walk you through it. And then you'd have a conversation based on kind of, what they've drawn out. And then also too, another option under participatory is kind of a build your own. So, you've got different elements and you want them to kind of build their own to show you what's, again, it's kind of similar to what's on your radar. Through building your own, you're able to understand what's important to them. Now, you might not be, Right now, your topic might be so big and fuzzy and, oh, I don't even know where to go, that a build your own might not be appropriate, or something, but something that's a bit more focused. I mean, I could see a build your own potentially working, but if I look at kind of all the participatory research methods right now, I mean, maybe again, maybe you're not quite at that point, but maybe some cognitive mapping, for example, could be an interesting one to consider. And then I did want to bring, of course, I do want to mention that, of course, there are always surveys, um, you know, you know, and other kind of quantitative, analytics and data mining that you can do. But for me here, honestly, because of the types of space and problem space that we have queued up, I could really only see surveys helping if you're like, I just don't know what area to focus in on. But honestly, I just feel like by doing a couple of interviews with a couple of participants, that would allow you to start to figure out what areas are going to matter the most, because it's here, we're wanting to learn as much as we can, but we also want to empathize. And you can't really empathize with surveys. You're really going to empathize by having that direct, that direct interaction with the actual humans we're wanting to, and whose situations we're wanting to improve. Just quickly, I want to kind of highlight just kind of some of the benefits of the field research, because that's definitely what I'm going to kind of recommend and encourage you guys to do, is to really to do the field research. Is, again, it's in context. So because it's in context, you end up learning things that are unexpected, that you would not have any other way to learn by being in context. That direct observation is really, really going to make sure you understand what someone is really doing versus just what they say they do. One of the other big things that you can do with the field research is, you're going to be looking for the hacks and the workarounds. So, what are they having to do that is a workaround of, from outside of kind of like, say, if it's an actual tool or something you're seeing them, use, what are they having to do outside of that, or because it doesn't truly meet what they, what they need. With the field research as well, it really helps focus on outcomes and not features, because there, you're focused on what are they trying to do, what are they trying to accomplish. Again, you're always going to learn something unexpected when you're there in their natural environment, and it's really only it's one of the best ways, and really one of the only ways to really get some big picture insights versus just some smaller understandings, if you will. Let's see, let me zoom back out, move over to the next part. So I want to jump in a little bit more into interviewing and contextual inquiry, but before I do that, I am going to, I've got just this kind of this space here around kind of interview and observation do's and don'ts. So I would love for us to kind of jump into this interview and observations do's and don'ts area. And I know, I mean, even if we haven't actually done any formal interviews and observations in research, I know that we kind of instinctively know a lot of what we should do and shouldn't do. So I'd love for you guys to just on the pink stickies, capture your do's on the pink stickies, and then capture the don'ts on the blues. And if we don't have enough, then we can always, we can always add more stickies. And we'll just do just basically just actually, you know what, I'll say just actually a minute, I think would be enough for us to kind of jump in. And we've actually got our timer right now that's at 1:07, so let's kind of let that click tick down on just kind of capturing and again the pinks will be the things we should do, and then the blues will be the things that we shouldn't. And then as you start to create these, let's go ahead and start to do a little bit of affinity clustering on them as well. And I'll go ahead and start to do that too. So I see to around listening, give them time. Yes, ask the questions. if you want to go ahead and put in a few more of your final thoughts, let's just continue to do some quick clustering on it as well. So it's like, it's like instinctively, we kind of know a lot of what to already do. It's just the challenge is if you haven't done it a lot, some of these things aren't as natural as, when you first kind of sit down and start to brainstorm, there's some fairly natural, they're like, oh yeah, this is common sense. Well, duh, yeah, why, of course you're going to do that. But in the moment, right, it becomes very, a lot more challenging, which again is one of the reasons why we do create a kind of an interview guide up front. That way, during that interview guide, you can already have, several kind of open-ended questions that you're already asking. And and you already have kind of your areas that you're going to focus in on. Yeah. And then so I've also and just a few more screens from this, I'd kind of started to already build out a do's and don'ts, so we can kind of come back here and look at the do's and don'ts and see if we've thought of any others that aren't on that do's and don'ts as well, and we can drag them over in just a bit too, if they are missing. But yeah, we've got some good ones here. So I'm going to jump to the next part because I think I'm trying to see if there's anything here that actually there's a really good one here on the B. I'm just going to pick out a few of these real quick. So on the use inclusive language, yeah, super important. Another thing there that I'd say too is, whenever you're doing an interview or an observation, you are there to learn as much as possible as you can from that participant, right? You are the sponge, you are the apprentice. I don't care if you are the expert in the subject that you are there, doing research on. And in that moment, that person is the expert. And so yeah, important to use inclusive language, but also too, just important to use their language. When you hear them refer to things in a certain way, you need to kind of adopt that language during that interview. Or even too, if you hear them mispronounce something during that interview, that is how you are going to pronounce those words as well, because you never want them to feel less, right? So it's super important. Yes, definitely want to be, observe as much as possible. They're going to be the one that's going to be, doing the talking. I love this one here about being flexible, right? It's some approaches require a very, an interview script, if you will, where we're always going to ask all these same questions. My approach is always much more flexible. It's more of, these are the topics we want to learn about. And quickly in that first couple of questions with that particular participant, you're going to learn what area, here's my 8 topics I want to know about. It's perfectly fine that this particular participant can only cover 4 or 5 of them, because you've got a bunch of other participants you're going to be learning from. So you want to be flexible and kind of follow the conversation. You want to stay, in scope, if you will, but you want to follow the conversation, because you want to be able to discover, kind of things that are unexpected, and maybe you even, maybe you think, these are the 8 topics I want to learn about, but then maybe you quickly realize, wow, I knew so little about the subject to begin with. Just in my first couple of interviews, I realized there's these other, 2 or 3 pockets of information that's going to be so much more valuable to kind of go, to follow and be flexible and learn from your participants. So again, I've got some do's and don'ts built out. What we can do in a minute is we can refer back to what we have here and see if there's any that we need to pull over into into the other part as well, that I might have initially missed when I was kind of quickly coming up with some do's and don'ts. So just again, real quickly on our interviewing, it is, again, so it's a technique for gathering information through direct dialogue. Got an image here of one of my team members at Schlumberger, where we are doing a field interview. So just kind of a couple of things to point out. One, we're in context. she's actually she's actually following a cement crew from the start of the job all the way through to the end of the job. So I guess the one thing here too is where I said, originally I said, you might be doing interviewing, you might be doing observation, you might be doing contextual inquiry, which combines them all. When you kind of go back to that comment earlier about being flexible, a lot of times you might be bouncing back and forth between these. Like here, Christy has a moment to do a bit of kind of an interview, but this person isn't actually doing the actual work right now, right? And there'll be other times where she can't be interviewing or being, or it's not like she can stop and say, hey, what in the middle of this dangerous job that you're doing, let me stop you and ask you a question, right? So there'll be moments where she's just being kind of doing that fly on the wall as well. So know that you kind of a lot of times you're flexible and in the sense of kind of following, where the conversation is going from, kind of, what it seems like you'll be able to get the most from that participant, as well as flexible in your actual research methods. And flexible in your research methods when you're doing qualitative, right? If you're doing quantitative, then you really can't be super flexible, because then you're not going to be statistically significant. But some of the benefits of doing the interviews. So first of all, interviews can be in person. Even better if it's not just in person, it is in context. But if you need to, right, it can always still be with the video conferencing or over the phone. If it is through video conferencing, kind of whenever there's opportunity, I always look for opportunities to also move the conversation to not just tell me, but show me. So, a lot of times there would be opportunity in a video conferencing for them to do a screen share, or for them to maybe move the camera around in their space, or hold things up and show you. So see if there's any opportunities to make that also be a show me opportunity, and not just a tell me. Again, your interviews can be structured or semi-structured. I prefer the semi-structured approach because I want to allow the conversation what this person is sharing with me to be kind of to know, like, that's where I'm going to kind of follow up and on with my next line of questioning. I might have, here's my topics I want to cover, and here's a couple of questions for each topic, but I'm going to be following my topics versus following, a strict set of questions. Another thing too is when you're doing your interviews, especially I with what we're doing right now. Imagine that your first couple are going to inform the rest of the research that you plan on doing. Right now, we don't know what we don't know. So one of the best ways to jump in and just start to get a better understanding of the space is to just do a couple of interviews, and just know that maybe your first couple will better inform what you want to actually do, and that's perfectly fine. And then also too, of course, with the interviewing, it's going to help kind of challenge your assumptions, and of course deepen your empathy. Just a few kind of quick do's and don'ts, and some of which we've already started to generate. Right, we're going to ask open-ended questions in context when possible. Interviewee is the expert. Another thing that we hadn't talked about yet is focus on past and present. Don't ask the interviewee, to imagine the future and tell you what they want. We're horrible at that. But what we can do is we can tell you stories about what has happened. Or explain to you about what is going on right now at present. Let's see, these other ones we've kind of already mentioned. So I'm going to slide over real quickly and look at the contextual inquiry. And again, kind of that is now where we are balancing the interviewing and the observations together. And then again, these are the two that I'm going to kind of push and recommend that you guys try to see if we can make these happen for what you're doing. But again, it's with the contextual inquiry, it reveals what people really do and not just what they say they do. We are horrible horrible at self-reporting error. A lot of times it's not that we are wanting to intentionally deceive the other person. It's just we have a tendency to talk aspirationally about what I would like to be doing, but not what I really, really do, especially on things that might make me feel guilty. So for instance, if you were researching something, say around, say, health and fitness or whatever, and you were to ask me about my, how, about my activity, I'll probably, I will tell you, ask me, I'll tell you, oh yeah, I walk 30 minutes, 3, 4 times a week because that's what I want to do. But then you might be sitting in my space and being like, those tennis shoes haven't even been taken out of the box yet, right? So it's what I say and what I really do are going to be very, very, very different. And again, not trying to deceive. We just, we talk aspirationally a lot about what we'd really like to be doing, but not what we really, really do. Another thing too, based on kind of what it is that you are learning a lot more about, especially if it's something that I've been doing for a long time, I forget a lot of the little steps because it's so subconscious now. So if you were to just kind of interview me about, say, the steps to do of what I do, I'm going to gloss over a lot of the little details because I've just gotten used to it, or maybe even some of my workarounds or hacks. It's just they're just that's just part of the process now. So I don't even think of it as a workaround or a hack, or it might even be something that, I mean, it's like, this is a really simple example, but like at Schlumberger, when we sit down and watch people, do some of their work, it's ridiculous the number of systems they have to copy and paste from because it's it's a disjointed ecosystem. So I've got 2 or 3 different systems I have to copy and paste from, or I have a spreadsheet where I do a lot of my work. And as a researcher, you look at that and you're like, oh my God, that's unacceptable. But for them, they're like, that's just how it is. I'm used to it. They're actually impressed by how quickly now they can put things into their spreadsheet and put it back into the system, right? So it's like, so as if you were to talk to them about kind of what needs to be improved, or what the pain points are, they might not even recognize that as something that needs to be improved, or a pain point, because they are, they're used to it, or they're kind of impressed at how because they've been doing it for X number of years now. They're impressed by how efficient how efficient they've gotten it, right? So and then again, same kind of benefits before as I guess that would kind of be speaking to kind of like being able to see some of the illogical processes that are going on, and then also too, again, just like interviewing, it helps remove assumptions, and it deepens empathy. And then I'm gonna skip some of these quick guides because we've kind of already talked about that, and I'm going to kind of repeat it a little bit right now in this kind of the do's and don'ts. So again, these are the do's and don'ts that I'd captured ahead of time. We can go back and see if we've got any additional do's and don'ts from that brainstorming that we can bring over to just to have a good kind of cheat sheet for all of us. But in terms of the do's, kind of in context when possible, it's be prepared, have a plan, explain why you're here. Do not read from a script. I mean, so you're not going to don't read from a script, because we're not just going to follow a script, right? We want to follow the conversation of what they're sharing, but we also want to be as engaged as possible. So it's hard to be engaged as possible when I've got when I my eyes, I'm looking down and reading from a script. I want to be making eye contact, right? I want to make sure that they know that I am fully present, that I am hearing, I am engaged. On the be open and friendly, we've already talked about, you're going to ask open-ended questions, so questions that tell me about is a really, really good way to start an open-ended question, because it's going to invite a story. Again, the interviewee is the expert. You need to take on an apprentice mindset. Let the user lead the conversation, use their language, keep an open mind. So on kind of the flip side of that, keeping an open mind, do not assume. You're not going to correct them if they say something wrong. Again, don't ask leading questions. So those leading questions would be starting with do and did and have. And again, one of the reasons why you build out that guide to begin with is so you kind of already have a couple of kind of those open-ended questions already prepared. With experience, you get better with this. I can tell you there's been several times even now where in the moment I have a question I'm about to ask and I say the question in my head and I'm like, oh, nope, I need to reword it real quick because that's sounding a little bit more leading than I intend. And then kind of on the be clear and stay engaged, you definitely want to be embracing kind of the active listening, be open and present in the moment, whatever this person is saying, whatever's going on right now, this is all that matters. Don't be thinking about, don't be starting to synthesize your research. Don't be thinking about the next question. Be fully engaged in listening to what that person has to say. Don't be thinking about your mental to-do list. Another super important thing is to let the pauses happen. Don't fill the silence. When you ask a question and there's, give them time to think. Don't start kind of answering it for them if there's this awkward pause. Most of the time when there's this awkward pause, they're doing some deep thinking, and what comes out next is generally some of the more brilliant things you're going to hear. So you need to let those pauses happen. And then just on the be thorough, probe, dig deeper, ask clarifying questions. It's always good to say, okay, I think I heard you say blah, blah, blah. Is that correct? Because again, one, that shows that you're actively listening, but two, it also makes sure that you understood what they say. On the probing and digging deeper, ask, how often, who else does this? Why is this important on the how often, right? So in research, we are looking for patterns. So if they say how often, oh, very interesting. How often does that happen? Oh, only once. Okay, that's interesting, but that's not a pattern. So you're probably not going to act on that when you go in and move to the research, because again, you're looking for patterns, not just these one-offs of something that's happened. And before, like we had said before, focus on past and past and present. Don't focus on the future. So just a few other quick things. Let's see here. Where am I in the board? One moment.
April, we'll want to move into Q&A pretty soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when you are building out your research guide, so some things for you to consider here. So again, if you're using that in more of like that being flexible, that this is really a guide, not a script. So some of the things you're going to think about here is, what is the purpose of what is the purpose of my plan? What is the scope of my research? What are my goals? What are the methods? What are the methods that I've selected? What are the user profiles that I am going to want to target? On the roles definition, kind of think through your actual team, who's going to be doing what during the actual interviews. The facilitator script, this is a way for, so hopefully you're going to not just have one or two people, and like the entire team, hopefully, right, will be doing the actual interviews. So with your script, that's what's going to allow to make sure that we're all asking, covering the same topics, and it will allow you guys to kind of divide and conquer. So you could be kind of breaking up the interviews or the contextual inquiry that you want to do. Think about how you're going to be taking notes and how you're going to be running your debriefs. Think about kind of the expected deliverables that you're going to want. You kind of already ahead of time kind of decide, what do we think kind of the deliverables might start to look like, so I can make sure that the information I'm gathering is going to be able to support that deliverable. On the identifying the participants part, so I mean, you're going to need to figure out, what are the user profiles I really want to target. And so be determining kind of what are the characteristics and behaviors of those profiles. Determine the number of participants. Generally, again, for qualitative research, 5 to 6 people per user profile should be good enough to get started. On the recruiting, because I know that was one of the, some of the things that was said. So if you're working for a large company, recruiting is pretty easy, right? You go and look at your customer database, you send an email out to see who might be interested. Then you would probably send them to a survey to be able to screen the people that say they're interested to make sure they fit your right, your right profile. You've actually kind of, you've done a search in your database and in the first place to even target people that you think are matching your profile, but you do a screening set of questions to make sure that even more so. But for us right now, you're probably going to need to reach out, say in social media, if you will, to kind of try to find some participants, or maybe you've got friends or family that are already in the space that can that can help you. But we can when we come back from our break and kind of work on our research plans, well, we can do some brainstorming around what might make the most sense from a recruiting perspective. But basically, social media might be one of the best answers for you guys right now, and unless you already know an organization that you can kind of lean on for guidance there. And again, screen if necessary. And then also, thinking through the actual scheduling, scheduling of your sessions. The other thing, just real quickly, I want to say here before we go on break, is I just want to kind of talk high level about, your kind of the structure of your interview guide. And so in your interview guide, you're going to start off kind of first by, introducing yourself and explaining your purpose. And then you'll have kind of a set of opening questions just to kind of ease them into the conversation. So again, that tell me about your background and history. Tell me about the last time whatever whatever your topic is. So I'd say a lot of times you're going to start that kind of tell me about. Then you're going to have your main questions. So this will be kind of open-ended questions that are covering the actual topic you want to address. And then you'll generally have some kind of closing questions and wrap up. So example of like a closing question is kind of the magic wand question. So it's like, okay, so if you had a magic wand, what thing would you, what would you improve? Or another kind of good kind of closing question is, is there anything else that you'd like to that we haven't covered that you think is important? And then also too, on the wrap up, you thank them for their time. And then another good thing to do during the wrap up is ask them, would you be available for follow up? Because you guys are going to be doing evaluative testing later, right? If this person says yes, I'm available for follow up, then you already have you already have a participant for the evaluative research. Or if you have any additional questions later on, you can always kind of follow up and ask them those questions. And then just the last few things around kind of the considering right now is, again, figure out what your roles are going to be. So typically you have a research lead that is guiding the session. You might have a co-lead who is taking notes, and they're looking over the interview guide to see if there's anything that we might want to cover that we've missed. If you have a third person, and you would not typically, but if you had a third person, that person could again be taking notes and kind of focus on taking the pictures. Record if possible, right? Gather artifacts, take as many pictures as possible. See if there's anything, any things that you can do to kind of document it, take screenshots, or look for the hacks. May or may not need a release form. Always attempt to debrief after, while everything is fresh and in your mind. You might even want to come up with a debrief template. Show up ready and prepared. You don't show up and be like, oh my gosh, I need to go to the bathroom, right? So show up ready and prepared. And also don't stack your sessions back to back to back. Give a little bit of breathing room in between for your debrief, and then for you guys to talk about if there's any pivots that you might want to make before the next session as well. But gonna pause there for a moment. Do we want to do a quick Q&A, or do we want to do a bio break since we're at an hour 5 right now?
Let's do the break first. You can think about some questions. Then if you have any, put them in the chat during the break, or we'll try to address them before we go into our activity. So I will put 5 minutes on the timer. Everybody stretch, go to the bathroom, get a drink, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Sorry, my cat is joining us now after our break.
So looking over some of the questions we have. So we've got one. So in your industry, how many weeks, months might a research endeavor take from planning to execution to analyzing? So of course, with everything, right, it's always one of those, it depends. So what I recommend with research, I'll talk ideally for a moment. So ideally, you separate research from, if your company is running an agile process, ideally, you separate research from the agile process. And ideally, you have a research team that is just constantly out ahead of what you are kind of doing in your sprint and trying to continually do that big picture research, do that understanding, and you're feeding it back to the other teams. When you're doing research in your actual sprints, it's more of that evaluative research where I'm trying to make sure I've built the right thing right. And you've got that front end research, that strategic research, that is essentially going to be feeding your backlogs, if you will, right? Where we're focusing on kind of, what are the problems we need to solve? And so I'd say that, and so ideally you want to break it up as much as possible, and be even about with your research, be agile about it as well. It's more of like, what are the biggest things we need to learn right now, and we'll go and do that versus I'm going to go and learn everything first and synthesize everything and then get it back over. Because if you do that, if you try to go and I want to learn everything I need to, that's going to be months and months of gathering and synthesizing. So you do want to kind of be nimble and be about, what is the most important things to learn first, and then you just kind of keep circling back. Okay, what do I need to learn next? Or okay, now that I've learned these first things, these couple of things first, what's kind of the next layer down? So it's kind of like one of the, a bit of an iterative, if you will, of keep trying to see, okay, what do I need to learn next? Or another way of kind of looking at it are, what are the kind of the big assumptions and hypotheses that we're making right now? We'll go and have someone kind of start to research and kind of validate, or kind of what are the biggest risks right now? If I were to get this wrong, what's the biggest risk? And and go and kind of tackle your research that way. So I'd say in general, and there's another question here about, had made a comment about a boot camp of taught 2 to 3 weeks for agile. So again, when we're talking agile, we're talking slices, right? You're taking a small piece of something. So because you're taking a small piece of something, yes, you should be able to go and do research. And then again, because you've got a nice well-honed process, right? You in theory should be able to do research in a matter of a couple of days. But it's because if you kind of go back and think about all the steps being done, if you're going to go and do research and it's going to happen in say just a couple of days, you already have a base of participants already set up. So you already have that's kind of already being done for you as well. And again, and you're very, very focused about what it is I want to learn this time. Okay, next sprint, what is it I want to learn this time? Next sprint, what is it I want to learn this time? But when you're kind of just starting off, it's also not uncommon to say, okay, first sprint or even the next, the first couple of sprints, right, will be all about, all about discovery as well. And in a perfect world, right, you would be, you would kind of remove a bit of kind of the design thinking part of it, right? So remove that bigger picture research and the bigger concepting from the actual sprints, and so you're kind of playing around with that. And once you think you've got something viable, then you actually push it into your sprint teams to actually start to make it happen, right? Clarify how to determine what our user profiles are. So for instance, and I'll use something very, not related, but something that I can quickly use to explain. So used to work for United Airlines. So of course, when I think about user profiles, I'm going to be thinking about, okay, business travelers and leisure travelers. But even beyond that, I know that I'd break it up even more than not just a business traveler or a leisure traveler. I'd say, okay, for a leisure traveler, I'm interested in a group travel, group travelers or family or individuals all traveling to a final destination that's the same. A business traveler. Okay, I'm interested in a business traveler that is super time sensitive. I'm interested in a business traveler that is more, a loyalty customer. They're going to fly the airline no matter what. I'm interested in business travelers that live in my hub cities. I'm interested in business travelers that live in my spoke cities. So they're always going to have a connecting flight. I'm interested in people that are flying domestically versus internationally. So I come up with all the different user profiles that I'm interested in learning more about. And then I'm like, oh my God, that's 200 people I'd have to interview. And then from there, I'd go back and say, okay, but who do I care about the most right now? And kind of refocus. And so that's kind of what I mean by the different user profiles. So as you look at your topic area, are there different kind of behaviors, if you will? So for instance, my behavior as a business traveler versus a leisure traveler would be very different. Let's see.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's really helpful just to hear that those like real world context answers and clarifying.
Yeah,
I'm wondering if we can go ahead and move into the drafting your research plan section, and then we can come back to
absolutely.
these other Q&As. We'll save them for you, Jen, Etcha, and Sarah. We'll get those answers to you later.
Yeah, so we have in the board these right now I'm sharing out team 5. So basically we've got this template kind of want you guys to kind of start to jump in and use to start to think through what your research plan would be. So that kind of the areas here to figure out is kind of what I imagine you guys had did a little bit more further kind of, thinking through of your actual kind of problem space definitions from your last session. So kind of, what are your, where are you at right now from that? And then from there, you can kind of think about what are some kind of assumptions or hypotheses that we already have, or what are some of the biggest risks right now? Like, oh my gosh, if we're wrong here, then the rest of our ideas are going to be completely, messed up. But from here, once you kind of have defined kind of here's my problem space, what are the different goals that you want to get out of the research? So basically, what are the things that you want your research to help you learn? And then from there, you can do some brainstorming around kind of your potential user profiles you might want to target. What are some of the methods? What are the topics, based on your user goals that you might want to be able to address? You probably won't get to this part yet, but the research questions would allow you to start to think through, what are potentially some of the questions, and then to kind of brainstorm around, where might we kind of find, on the recruiting and recruiting side, where might we be able to get access to these potential participants? What options do we think we have available to us? But this is kind of just a few things to basically spend roughly, Meredith, where we think it's still about 20 minutes on this to kind of start to get started on thinking through your research plans.
Yes, we can do 20 minutes. We may not have as much time to discuss synthesizing. So I'll put you in groups and we can play it by ear. We'll be jumping around to make sure you guys are okay. And make sure you have enough time. I attempted to put everybody in groups.
Wow. So many faces.
Welcome back, everybody. Hope that wasn't too jarring of an experience leaving your rooms. That's always the awkward part, ripping you out of your conversations.
Yeah, so I would say just kind of listening into a little bit too, right? So there's the planning is you know, there's a lot more to this, right? I mean, this is just kind of to get you guys started, and you're just kind of quickly realizing that there's a lot to kind of work through, especially on the really broad topics. One thing I would recommend to consider, I mean, especially if interviewing is one of the methods, or you're still trying to figure out, oh my gosh, where do we even start? I was telling one of the groups, like, when you think about who you might be involving in the interview process, it certainly helps to kind of think about kind of your full kind of stakeholder ecosystem, if you will. So, you know, yes, you know, think about the actual kind of the actual humans whose lives we are wanting to make, you know, make better. But, you know, certainly, you know, you can kind of think about kind of if you start to think about like the slightly larger ecosystem, that might even be a good couple of people to start with first, that could even help you in trying to figure out, you know, where to even begin. And again, if I were to use that the airline analogy again, it's like, yes, I'm going to focus in on the travelers, but I also will probably spend time talking to reservations agents. And then maybe when I'm talking to the reservations agents, I'm gonna inquire around, you know, what are the types of things that customers call you, like what problems are customers calling you with that they're struggling on, right? Or I might, you know, go talk to one of the, you know, a gate agent, or, you know, so I'm going to talk to, you know, the people that are still kind of connected to that larger ecosystem as well. So like that group was, you know, talking about like, you know, getting the like the LGBTQ kind of the health. So it's more about, you know, yes, you know, you want to target, you know, your actual you know, those that need the health, and want to make sure that they are getting health from a provider that, you know, from a, you know, physician that they're comfortable with. But, you know, maybe part of your research is going and talking to one or two of the community groups that already kind of, you know, that help provide with that, so you can kind of understand what are the types of things already that, you know, people are struggling with, or you know, if you can already identify who are some top you know, top healthcare providers already that have, you know, 5 stars of it because they're so, you know, so friendly, or a part of the community already. I mean, so definitely, you know, definitely think about the larger, you know, the larger kind of connected ecosystem as potential places to for interviewing, or even potential places to help you with figuring, you know, to help even help with focusing as well. So unfortunately, with research, it's a pretty, it's one of those things where there's 2 parts to it, right? So first we have to figure out what we want to understand in the first place, and how we want to go about you know, gathering that understanding. But we also have a second part that we need to kind of go over in our 2 hours together. And that is the, you know, now that we have gone and gathered all of this wonderful information, now what do we do with it? So did want to, during our time together, start to walk through kind of what the actual synthesis part of it would look like as well. So we can kind of start to get an idea of, as I'm doing the research and gathering, you know, my observations and what I'm learning, you know, what next. So I would say at a very simple kind of high level, the synthesis process looks like it's like, so what did I see? So basically, you know, what did I hear? What did I see? Here's all my data points that I've gathered. And I'm imagining they're probably on sticky notes, or I've got my research debrief that's got images in it, and a couple of, you know, paragraphs that I've typed up. So it's either sticky notes with images, or sticky notes and images, plus maybe some, you know, Word docs that are cut up with the different paragraphs. And the next thing that you're going to most likely do is, okay, here's all the data. how is it related? So you'll start to do some, affinity clustering of looking at, and again, because we're looking for patterns. So one of the best ways to look for patterns is to start to do some affinity clustering to start to understand what is related. And I will say, I mean, if you've done any affinity clustering, to do it and do it well is not easy, and it takes a lot of time, because you'll know you've done it right when you've clustered and reclustered again, because it's when you're doing the clustering, it's you're looking for patterns, you're trying to understand what is related. So every time you recluster, you're recognizing a different or an additional or a stronger relationship between your data. So constantly trying to look at what's important, what really matters. And also too, as you're looking at what's important, what really matters. So that's kind of when you start to be able to get to your, your insights of, what does it mean? What do I really care about here? What ends up happening also is you're basically starting to abstract the conversation to the next level, and it is this ability to abstract that's what's going to allow you to then kick it into the ideation phase to really start to explore the what's possible. So you're going to, here's my data points. What is it? What's all related? Now that I start to understand some of the relationships, I'm going to generate insights, and then with those insights, you would be able to start to identify some guiding principles and some design directives, at the very least design directives, which are just a different way of saying our how might we statements. So I know a lot of us already have some how might we statements right now going into research, because that's a good way to kind of start your problem framing around how might we. And as you do your research, you'll be able to reframe those how might we statements into something that's probably a bit more focused now, based on what you've now recognized as what's related, and then what are the insights that you've gleaned from what's related. So I've already kind of walk through this a bit more. So this is kind of what your synthesis might start to look like, right? So I've got Post-it notes, I've got images that were captured. These are like little paragraphs here, or things that were kind of cut out of research debriefs. The Post-it notes are either us kind of sharing and telling stories, or as we're starting to look at our clusters, we're starting to capture, kind of those observations and things of what really matters. But now, as you do this clustering, so there's based on your experience, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can essentially kind of codify the data that you've gathered. There's a real common method of AEIOU. So, so A for activities, I for interactions, E for environment, AEIO for objects, U for users. As one way. It might be that when you're going through and looking at your, you've got your themes and things that you're already starting to identify of things that you want to know about. You might use that as how you start to kind of codify things. What I want to introduce to you, I mean, so if those work for you and those are things you want to do, by all means, go for it. However, I want to introduce to you a very simple way to codify your data that you gather. And it is just using a simple technique called rose, thorn, bud. I'm not saying that this is the only way you would want, but in terms of just kind of getting started and knowing that we have kind of limited time, this to me is more than enough. This is all you really need to be able to get started. Yes, there are much more kind of complicated and academic ways to do it, but rose, thorn, bud is super simple and super powerful. So with the rose, thorn, bud technique, what you would essentially do is, here's all of my research notes, and I am now going to codify them into, so it uses the metaphor of a rose. So I'm going to capture on my pink stickies which represent the rose, anything that was positive that I that I heard or I observed that I learned from the research that I did. The light blue stickies will be the thorns. So anything negative that I that I heard or observed. And then the greens will be representative of the buds. So anything that has potential. Now, a lot of times the what has potential will not be things that you heard or observed. It'll be things that you start to infer from what you have heard and observed. You're like, I see this opportunity here. There's an opportunity to improve this, or an opportunity to improve that. So the buds might come out of, if you ask that, magic wand type question, but more often than not, the buds will be from your interpretation of what you have been able to observe, and the roses and thorns will be coming directly from those that you have actually interviewed and observed. And then from your roses, thorns, and buds, then you would do an affinity clustering. And when you do your affinity clustering, what I challenge you to do there, and again, if you just take those and then do your affinity clustering, you don't need to worry about all these other ways that I wanted to codify something, because the clustering here, when you go from your rose, thorn, buds to your clustering, that's what's going to start to pull out your themes and the other things that you might have kind of attempted to codify in the first place. And when you do your clustering, the most important things here right now is, don't do your clustering based on what. So that you shouldn't look at this and come back and say that they shouldn't feel like kind of nouns or categories. You're going to want to cluster based on so what, like, why does this matter? Why should I care? And that's what's going to, and if I were to do this is maybe not exactly the best related example, but one I had immediate access to. So you're going to do your rose, thorn, buds. Don't be generic. I hear this one thing. This is from some training that I've been running, where it's you don't want to be vague. Like, so you don't just want like one or two words on your post-its. You want to a good descriptive that kind of stands on its own. But when you do the affinity clustering, there's kind of two steps to it. Step one is, you're going to share, hey, this is, here's a data point I'm going to share, tell my story, and then anyone else that had something similar to kind of share, cluster, recluster. As you're doing this, again, you want to cluster not on kind of, you want to match the meaning, not the words, and not the colors. So it's not going to be, here's just a big cluster of roses, here's a big cluster of thorns. You really want to be looking at the so what, why does this matter? And as you do that, let's scoot over here. As you do that, you'll end up with, so when you have clusters that you're ready to start to label, there's kind of like a 3-step process to this. First it's okay to kind of slap your label on there, but that's kind of more about, say, the what. So, like, for instance, in this example, this is a group of post-its that are focused around more about trying to reimagine how you learn at work. So the label here is learning with a purpose. But as you start to kind of read through the post-its, that what you want to kind of move to this observation level of what, okay, that's great, but what really matters? I can't really do a whole lot with learning with a purpose. So for instance, here, there were some comments around that someone said, well, I mean, I learn how to do stuff all the time outside of work. I mean, I'm constantly watching YouTube videos to figure out how to repair something, or, I'm a DIYer. So I'm always doing things that I have no business doing, right? Because so it's more of like, so there, like, an observation that could have been made from that is, not knowing how to do something doesn't stop you from trying. Now, is that what the actual person you interviewed said? No, but now I'm going to kind of abstract out now at kind of like at an observational level of what what does that mean? What does that matter? So what matters from there, and one observation of what matters is, not knowing how to do something doesn't stop you from trying. And then you can layer it up even more to an insight of, okay, okay, but that's cool, but how can I make that more in an insight, and make it more actionable to be able to apply to the work environment? And so an example of kind of layering that up and abstracting it one layer more is we would be more, work would be more fulfilling if you were assigned projects that required learning while doing. And so it's like, so you keep abstracting and layering up, and all of that came from, right, just some comments around, participants talking about that I YouTube stuff all the time, or I'm constantly learning outside of work. So it's kind of like an example of how you might start to kind of abstract out and focus in on the what matters, not the what, because if I had grouped these things on what's, I might have had a cluster around YouTube's, learning using YouTube might have been my what, versus the no, why is this important? What really matters here? And so that's what you're going to be doing when you start to do the clustering, is trying to figure out what really matters. There's two other things that you might want to consider with your data that you've been gathering from a research standpoint. So first, again, you have your, you're looking for your themes, your themes, and kind of driving insights from that point of view. And then in addition to your rose, thorn, bud affinity clustering, again, I definitely recommend that you do the rose, thorn, bud affinity clustering. If you're going to do anything else, there's two other things to consider. One might be some type of mapping activity. Two really common mapping activities would be an empathy map or a journey map. So if what you are researching has a lot of a logical kind of journey to it, then maybe kind of mapping out a journey map might make sense. And then from there too, you're looking at patterns from multiple user journeys put together to kind of look for patterns of where are the biggest pain points, where are the biggest opportunities to be able to draw your insights from. You can also have your empathy maps, where you're kind of capturing, what are people thinking, saying, doing, thinking, feeling, but it's not in the context of the actual kind of, the actual journey itself. So those could be two really good considerations for activities. And then the other thing that could be really, good considerations for activities of trying to look at outputs of ways to look for, patterns in your research is personas or jobs to be done. And these are kind of, good techniques again too, for being able to identify needs. And on those, it would be, you'd fill out your persona template, right? And then on the jobs to be done, just kind of real quickly, there's two constructs for a jobs to be done. There's your typical one of you're kind of capturing a when a particular triggering event happens, I want to, and kind of what is the kind of their motivation or goal, so that, and kind of what is the outcome. So that's a really good way to try to structure what are the types of things that this person is trying to accomplish. So once I know what they're trying to accomplish, I can then start to ideate and come up with solutions for them. Or another simple way to kind of look at that is, what are things that they need help to do or help to avoid. I've got one more thing I want to go over, because this part is super important, and I know we're running out of time. So with our insights, we need to come up with, we're going to reframe our problem so that we have new how might we statements. These how might we statements will be what we use for our ideation session when we come back up. So we're in the problem space. As we exit the problem space, we're reframing the problem based on what we have now learned using our how might we statements. We intentionally use how might we, because how assumes there's a solution, might defers judgment so that we can have expansive thinking as we think of solutions, and we, because it's collaborative. The one thing that I know we need to kind of wrap up. I will stay on though after our wrap up to answer questions, but the one thing I want to leave you with down here is, this is a good, as you look at kind of how everything fits together to be able to package up how you want to communicate. This was what was from a very large research project at United. This is old enough that I'm comfortable sharing it. And it just kind of shows you how some of these things fit together. So up here are kind of the guiding principles, if you will, that came out of the research. These are the design directives, which are the how might we statements. So the how might we statements are your design directives. these word, these words here are design direct, are guiding principles. And then I just wanted to kind of show you here quickly, as you kind of look at how you might package some of this, is again, design our guiding principles. But here you'd be able to show, okay, here are our principles, here's an observation we had, here's an insight. So you can just kind of take a look at this as it's just a nice way to potentially kind of package what you will be communicating out. And then again, the one thing I want to stress to you right now is in the research phase, you've got two big things you're needing to finish right now, right? You've got the whole planning and doing the research itself, as well as the synthesis, and they're both, very involved things, and in the synthesis is going to take you a lot more time than you probably realize right now. But again, I know Megan and Michelle have a few things to kind of close us out on, but I'm happy to stay online too if anyone still has some time and wants to kind of work through, answer any additional questions. And I also put in a few kind of templates that you guys can look at too. Down here of an empathy map that you could potentially use, or something you can use for personas, as well as some examples of what journey maps might look like. And then also those jobs to be done, and help me avoid examples for you guys. So there's still a lot in here that you can kind of look at and click on as well. And I'll check out the Slack channel too, as you guys have questions along the way.
Awesome. I am going to attempt to bring everyone to me on the board. So hold your horses. You're probably about to get looped around the board. Okay, cool. That way we don't have to switch sharing. Mm-hmm. So next up, Thursday, June 24th, we have an office hour for you to get feedback on your research plan, how your interviews are going, your research synthesis, all of that stuff. So you can see this screenshot that I hastily added in here. If you click the sign up link, and it's also in the Zoom chat, you can add your team to this column over here. We're breaking the hour up into 3 20-minute rounds. So add your team name next to the mentor that you'd like to get feedback from. And that will help us get everybody to the right place in GatherTown. We'll be using that space or that platform together for this purpose. So be sure to do that. That event will not be posted on Meetup. It will be posted in the Slack channel for you to be able to access. We want it to be really focused on teams needing advice. So we don't want to open that up publicly to the entire organization. But then the next public event is the solution ideation workshop. So between now and the middle of July, you'll be working on your research plans, conducting your research, and then we'll be turning that into your very first solution ideas. So before you prototype, what are the high-level ideas that you want to address with your solution? So come back for that. And I've posted some handy links here as well. You can reference any of this on our Notion page. We'll be posting the Miro board link and the recording link there for you to reference. You can jump into GatherTown at any time. That room just remains open. So if you want to gather your team, jump in there. And then between now and July, like I mentioned, teams should be working on developing your research plan and conducting the research itself. So if you need to drop off of the call, I want to give you freedom to do that now. But if you would like to stay on and ask April a couple of questions for a few more minutes, we can do that now. So thanks everybody so much for joining, and we hope to see you at the next event. Woo-woo. And I think Michelle has collected some questions from the chat. So we want to go ahead and jump into those now. Then if you have additional questions, feel free to come off mute or add them to the chat. Michelle, can you get us kicked off with one of the questions that you gathered?
Yes, so we had two great questions. One was from Etja. Is it better to, I'll just post it here. Is it better to keep an age group closer together, like 30 to 50-year-olds, or is it okay to have a large age difference
Yeah,
for user?
really good question. I'd actually when I saw that in the chat window, it actually jumped into their group and kind of started to answer too in case it helped with what they were working on. So what I would say is so demographics, such as age, such as income, where you live. I mean, all of that is definitely good information to use when you're breaking down your user groups. However, what I would say is what's even more important is kind of looking at their behaviors. So if we think, for example, a age group from 14 to 80 will have the same kind of attitudes and behaviors, then I would say absolutely keep them together. However, if we think that when we kind of look at age and in other demographics, if we think that that is what is going to drive decisions and then drive behavior, that's why we would want to break the groups up, not necessarily just because of, I mean, although I imagine, there's going to be different behaviors, from the different age groups, but the main motivation for breaking groups up is because our assumptions are that there's going to be kind of different, different behaviors that we're going to observe as a result.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's key, behavior based. Great question, Edge. Thanks for asking. Yeah. And hello again from West Texas. She's out in the desert. We need to visit her. Perfect. Does anyone have some questions maybe from their brainstorm earlier that we can help answer? Don't be shy, come off mute. And
yeah, I would say, kind of looking around, right, there's still a lot of kind of initial problem framing, right, that still kind of seems like it needs to happen first to really get into the research plans. This is just kind of a general observation.
I have a question. Hi. Our group is doing menstrual health, and we have vulnerable people that we want to interview, but how do you access those vulnerable people? Say if we're looking at problems of accessibility for homeless people or people that are incarcerated, they're not going to be on Zoom or social media. So how do you get around that?
Yeah, great question. I guess for me, my initial thoughts, and hopefully others will have some initial, some other ideas as well. Is I guess my initial thought is, are there different kind of churches or community groups already that kind of have established relationships working with these groups that you could potentially even reach out to, and kind of explain kind of what it is that you're doing to see if they could kind of help kind of partner with you. And also too, in doing that, you also be able to, they could also probably start to inform you a bit more of some of the challenges that they've observed, right? So even kind of help with some of the direction of your research, potentially as well. So that's kind of like where I would recommend in terms of I'm starting. I don't know if anyone else has some other additional recommendations.
Thank you.
I'd also say too, I mean, social media might not be the means for being able to find the actual people you're going to want to talk to, but it might be the means for finding someone that has access to the people as well.
Yeah, as you do more desk research on the problem space, hopefully that will help you identify the organizations like April mentioned that that will have that access. So don't be afraid to reach out to those organizations. They're probably nonprofits and probably would love someone else to be thinking about the space with them. Any other questions that were not addressed in the chat before we hop off? All right, well, Michelle and I both started threads in the Hackathon Equity Slack channel. So if you think of more questions, feel free to post them there during the week. And I've invited April to the Slack team so she can jump in and help answer any of those if she has time. But I'm sure you'll have more questions between now and the feedback office hour. So we hope to see you there. All right. Well, everybody have a great weekend. I know I'll be reading through the board this weekend to get caught up on all of the information. So thanks so much for all of the material, April. We really, really appreciate your expertise.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And again, I'll definitely be looking at the Slack channel too to answer any other questions or post some other resources as well.
Okay, wonderful. All right, everybody, have a good one. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye, guys.